Hello, everyone, and welcome to I Love You Tea with Trashellie, not sponsored by Yoos Hiraharas, the I Love You podcast recorded here in our I Love You Discord server. I'm Ashley,
And I'm Elle.
and tonight we're going to be talking about found family versus blood family.
If you're reading I Love You and the recent chapter left you blue or feeling like it's too good to be true, we get together and share our theory, bend down and praise the almighty Quimchi. Come join us for tea with Trashellie.
This is a topic that Elle and I have been talking about for quite a while now, to the point that I've kind of talked about wanting to write about it, but we decided that it would be a lot more fun if we could talk about it as a podcast episode where we can just sit down together and just talk. So unlike other episodes where we try to give ourselves a little bit of an outline and kind of talking points, this is literally just going to be an Ashley and Elle sitting together and talking episode. We haven't done one of these in a long time, so
Yeah, we've been doing things that are pretty structured, especially with our character dives. And I know that we still don't generally sound that structured, but I promise we're working off something. So it's both kind of interesting and kind of fun, and a little bit nerve-wracking to revisit this format of sometimes there are topics that we just have in our brain that we're spilling out into the voice.
right. And especially this one because I think we are finally getting to a point in I Love You, like in terms of content, where we really get to dig into this a lot more. I believe the time where we really started to talk about this a lot more was around the time when we were recording our episode about theories and talking about some of our favorite theories and what some of those theories mean if proven true. And I remember we were talking about what does it mean if Kosuke isn't Rand's son, which, as we know at this point, has been proven or not textually fully come out to say, but we've got in text showing Rand is not the father, right? And one of the things that I remember us talking about is like I remember that really got me starting to think about how there feels like there's a running theme. I mean, there's let's be fair, there's a lot of running themes, but a really interesting running theme going on in I Love You has a lot to do with family, right? Because if we look at the Hiraharas alone, right, even then we've got the fact that Yui and Rand have Kosuke, and the fact that Kosuke is not Rand's son, right? But Rand is the father of Null. And kind of like what does this mean for them? And like because we know that blood family, and in this sense I'm talking about biological family, doesn't really mean anything, right? So like if we say Kosuke is Gun's son, right? It doesn't mean that Kosuke is predisposed to be anything like Gun. Like it doesn't mean that he is more likely to be a womanizer. It doesn't mean he's more likely to be a sexual predator because he wasn't raised with Gun's values. He wasn't raised in this household. It's not like his DNA makes him more likely to be like, I'm going to go and assault women, right?
And I mean, this is what we were talking about in the theories episode a while back. At least I think it was the theories episode, with Yui at the birthday party, or maybe it was one of the version of it. Now we're far enough along that I don't remember them all super clearly. But we were talking about how Yui makes it very clear early on kind of what she's about, and that Kosuke's birthday arc episode is likely, in at least we talked about multiple uses of the birthday episode, which we don't need to get into all of them here. But one of them is likely her testing Kosuke and kind of that vibe of like, are you just like the rest of them? And in that case, we're referencing it more broadly to like his entire gender, right? Because Yui has her whole fight against the patriarchy and like hates men era. And so she's trying to figure out like, if I put Kosuke in these situations, will he act like, someone like the Kims? Will he act like the other men in the Hirahara family? Will he show that he, by virtue of being genetically similar to them, despite, blood relations or not, in this case, just being similar by gender, like, will he act like them? Is this a trait that they all share? Is this ingrained? And ultimately, she like kind of wants it to be. She wants to prove that worldview right, that there is a bit of, you know, like fated determinism in all of us. But Kosuke ultimately defies that and shows that he is not, that doesn't define him, because like you said, that's not who he is. That's also not how he was raised. And when we expand this into thinking about, is Kosuke, we know that he's not Rand's son. Is he the son of one of the Kims? Is he the son of another Hirahara? Is he the son of someone unrelated to them? And for this purpose, we only know the Kims and the Hirahara, so I'm going to analyze him through that lens for this conjecture. But if he is, it's like you said, he wasn't raised with Gun Kim's values. He wasn't raised with the way that they operate, with the, things they take advantage of, with the opportunities they set up for themselves, with the entitlements that they feel, with the gross ways they view the world. He wasn't raised with any of that. So when he's presented with this situation that, someone like Sungchul would have absolutely taken poor advantage of, he doesn't, and he goes against what Yui thinks that he could do. Even
Right.
though he might be related to Gun, he might be related to Sangchul, these people who not only would take that opportunity, but actively, set it up for themselves, play the role that Yui was playing, and have their whole kind of character defined by it.
Right. I think something that I remember really started me on the thought was one of the conversations in the Discord server where people were talking about a statement that Kimchi had made before, saying that it would be harder for Shin-ae and her sister to reconcile than for Kosuke and Noel to reconcile. And obviously, at this point in the story, it was a statement that sounds really hard for people to get their heads around, right? Because when we've last seen Kosuke and Noel, Kosuke punched Noel. He fell from, a second floor, went after him and tried beating him up some more. The whole, bleeding altercation, they didn't end on very good terms. Noel has decided, he's done with Kosuke. He's putting him out of his life. He's not going to bother trying anymore. He's done with him. So, it's really difficult for people, I think, to be like, okay, how is it that they have a better chance of reconciling than, Shin-ae and her sister when they don't even have a relationship at this point, right? And I think that was probably the point where I started to really see this bigger picture, I guess, of the story of like found family versus blood ties, and to really start thinking about it. Because obviously, we're not trying to sit here and weave a story that found family is stronger, because, and what we'll get to is that we do still have very strong, blood family ties, right? We see that with Shin-ae and Simhan. Um, but I think there's like a really interesting narrative at play, and we're seeing some really interesting parallels there, right? Especially because to go back to like Kosuke. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that when we look at it, it's Kimchi is very intentionally contrasting our blood relatives and
Yes.
our family with each other as a way to kind of highlight the nuances and differences in how those relationships are developed and what creates potential in each of them to be positive or negative and impact you in different ways and stay with you.
Right.
And how your relationship, it is influenced by the various families that you are born into and build, but your relationships that you have aren't defined by the presence of a specifically genetic tie or a specifically non-genetic tie. And she does this really, really interestingly with, like you were kind of introducing, the concept of like Nolan Kosuke versus people like Shin-ae and Shin-hye. Because with Nolan Kosuke, we have this start where they originally are raised up completely separately, right? They, for the first, 5 years of Noel's life and 10 years of Kosuke's life, they don't know at all that the other even exists. They're happily living separately, as opposed to the Shin sisters, where they seem to be very close at the beginning of their lives and then they're ripped apart and never to be seen again. Whereas with Noel and Kosuke, they're forced together. Like it is like meteor hitting Earth collision impact. And the Shin sisters both start to long for that relationship that they lost, and when they come back together later on, they don't have it. And we're seeing this conflict build up where like Shin-ae is curious, but she kind of recognizes that Shin-ae has not been a presence in her life and doesn't have any sort of relationship with her, and them being sisters draws her to kind of want to build one, but she acknowledges that there isn't one there just because they're related. Where like having the idea that someone is family can keep you in each other's orbit, but it doesn't mean that you're actually connected. Whereas with Noel and Kosuke, they basically wanted like, well, they kind of wanted to have a relationship and kind of didn't. And they thought that because we're brothers, we have to build something. And it turned into this thing that was so awful. And then at the end of that, you find out that you're not actually related at all. But you have built something together. You have built this foundation and you've had the belief that you're family and you have an impact on each other's lives. And this whole time, even though they're not brothers, they've been seeing the positive traits in each other, like not biological brothers. And when they find out that they're not actually related, and this is a bit of conjecture, but it's very likely that it won't fundamentally really change the way they view each other's characters. Like it'll change the way that they kind of conceptualize the placement of each other in their lives. But like Kosuke doesn't stop being Kosuke just because he's not Rand's son. Noel doesn't stop being Noel just because, you know, Kosuke isn't Rand's son. Right? Where everything that they've built together still stands. And it's actually the tension between them that turns out to be the thing that didn't need to be there, not that it needed to be there in the first place. And we anticipate that they're going to recognize that original desire to have a relationship with each other and rebuild it and continue to be brothers. Whereas for the Shin sisters, they had a relationship and they longed for what they lost, but as adults, they don't know each other at all. So, you know, when they have conflicts, it's like there's no longer that foundation to actually help them really want to bridge it with who their current characters are as people, because they don't know each other. They're only going on each other based on the fact that they're family. And so it just creates this really interesting inherent parallel here. And I know we have more parallels, we have more pairs and such to talk about. But I think this is a really interesting opener just because of kind of how directly she contrasts those relationships. And with Kimchi saying that, you know, the sisters would have a harder time reconciling than the brothers, a lot of people think, well, Shin-ae is going to do something really awful, like that Shin-ae won't, you know, be able to forgive her or move past it or like bridge that gap and come back together. Like it has to be something earth-shattering. But the reality is like we're trying to measure that up against Noel and Kosuke, who obviously have this pretty earth-shattering trauma attached to their relationship, but they have a relationship. So when they do things nowadays, it's like they have an understanding of each other and a relationship and a like genuine appreciation, desire for each other underneath all of that they can still build upon to rebuild their relationship when they're ready. Whereas for the Shin sisters, like every time they get in conflict with each other, there's nothing backing that up other than the belief of, because you're family, we should have a relationship, or we do have a relationship. But they don't. And so the reason that it's harder for them to rebuild their relationship isn't necessarily because of something earth-shattering, which we do anticipate there's going to be conflicts between them and that they might end up being large conflicts, but we don't know. And it doesn't have to be, because at the end of the day, if you're not able to build a strong relationship, what is there to salvage when something breaks it down?
Right. I know we said that we're not going to do any planning, but I do wish that I had looked up some of the things that I've said in the server before, because I know I've waxed poetic about this before. Because I really do appreciate this contrast, and that's the thing that has, like I said, got me really thinking about this running theme a lot. Because like you said, I think that fundamental difference is that at the end of the day, when it comes to the Shin sisters, Shin-ae, she doesn't she doesn't have any obligation to her older sister, right? And I think that's what we're going to, when we come to those crossroads, I think that's going to be one of the ultimate deciding factors. There's that one quote she has when she's talking to her father about how she would never choose a boy over family. And she has that, she's got that mask on, right? And how in the moment we read it as, oh, she's never going to choose a boy over her father because, in that moment that's how it reads. But and I'm remembering it right? She said over family, not her father.
I
I
think she said
can't.
over family, but I can check.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it was family. And I think in retrospect it it kind of makes more sense to think that maybe that does mean that it could be something that deals more in the future with, having to make choices about, hey, what if this is more about her relationship in the future with her sister versus, with Noel? What if this is more about choosing found family over blood relations,
Okay, so what she says is, I'm not going to choose a boy over you. Family is more important. So
Oh,
she
okay.
does say over you,
Okay.
but she emphasizes family is more important.
Okay.
But
Interesting.
also,
Okay.
part of the thing there is, what does she consider family?
Right.
Because,
Right.
like, if we're thinking about this, like at the current moment, Minhyuk is
Families.
absolutely family to her, and we'll talk
Right.
about that later. In the future, is Noel not just a boy? Is he also family? Is
Right.
Shin-ae family, or is she not? Is
Right.
Simhan, like, where do they all fall in this idea of family for her?
Right. And, also because, she herself has said that Minhyuk is family to her. And I think that will be really interesting in seeing how Kim Chi is using that. Again, like you say, how is Shin-ae intending it? But at any rate, I do think things like that are something that we will probably see in the future in a really interesting way. Um, just because I think that's ultimately what would probably give her and Shin-ae the most um, obstacle is the fact that she doesn't have an obligation to her. Like how a lot of people, and when I say people, I guess I mean people who want to excuse behavior of others, right? Like especially people who want to excuse the behavior of relatives, abusive relatives. They like to be like, they're family, you can't push them away, they're family, you don't want to shut them out, right? um that's kind of what I think of when I think about Shin-ae and Shin-hae. Not that I'm saying that I think Shin-hae will be abusive, but more the way that people say that just because somebody is blood related to you means that you're obligated to them, right? and,
And
and I oh, go on.
oh, I was gonna say, yeah, like Solidarity was just saying, ultimately, that's how Shin-ae is excusing her own actions thus far. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna put a quick little fast pass spoiler in the tag. Um, is that, in the recent episodes when she's talking to Kosuke, she says, like, I have a sister and I try to do what I can from afar. And I forget exactly how she words it, if she says she's trying to protect her or not. But the ultimate convey is that because they're sisters, even though they haven't seen each other in all these years, and even though
Mm-hmm.
Renee doesn't seem to appreciate it or really need it in some ways. In some ways, she did need it, but in other ways, she did. She didn't need all of what Shin-ae was doing.
Or maybe just not the way she's doing
Yeah, not the way she's doing
it.
it. Um, that's it. Not the way she's doing it. Um, she still feels like she has this obligation, and this is the way that she can protect her sister, and this is the way she
Mm-hmm.
has to do it because of the type of relationship they currently have. But no matter where they currently stand, she has an obligation to her sister, and her sister has an obligation to her. Like Shin-ae has an
Mm-hmm.
obligation to let Shin-ae keep being in her life, to, even if she's not happy with her, forgive her. Um, to be given things by her, to be,
Mm-hmm.
protected by her, whether she likes it or not, whether it does good things for their, like, perception of each other's character and relationship in that sense or not. because of the fact that they're sisters, she already feels like there's obligation, and she knows that what she's doing isn't great. Like she
hides it.
she hides it. She
She
runs
doesn't want
away. She
Shin-ae
says,
to know.
yeah, she knows that there's something wrong with how she's doing it, but she feels like because they're family, it's that kind of like you were saying, that like excusing it off and like, well, family does what family do,
Right. And, we objectively know that family is not justification. Family is not an excuse. And I think, like you pointed out, this is such a very clear and decisive contrast. And I feel like it's very pointedly done that way for us to see that. Especially because, again, going back to Noel and Kosuke, for them to find out that, surprise, hey, we were never actually blood related at all. Surprise, we never actually needed to be shoved into each other's lives at all. And to ultimately, as we anticipate happen, go back to each other because they still have those shared experiences. At their core, there are still things about each other that they still admire. And they're going to find that they share some of the more traumatic aspects of their lives as well. In contrast to the relationship with Shin-ae and her sister, where like you said, there isn't a relationship. Shin-ae was so young that relationship to her is something that she holds only in memories and recollections. Um, everything that Shin-ae knows of her, she had learned through stalking her, literally breaking into their house and spying on her. Um, very, like everything she knows about her, she has learned from the shadows.
And it's like Noel and Kosuke have this relationship where the thing that they act like the thing that they kind of long for is the relationship they actually had, even through like all the bad. Whereas the thing that they're kind of like has put a conflict in their lives is the idea of what that relationship is, the idea of being brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're longing for that physical relationship, and they're grappling with the idea of what their relationship is externally. Whereas for the Shin sisters, they're longing for the idea of their relationship. They're longing for the idea of that long lost sister, of my long lost sister who's now an adult that I've met again, or my long lost sister who I wonder how she is, I wonder who she's doing, I wonder who I'd be if we were never ripped apart. I wonder what it would be like. But what they're grappling with, what's creating conflict, is the relationship they actually have with each other and the lack thereof. So it's also an interesting contrast in that way, where like they're juxtaposed together in what they actually have versus what they're longing for, and the idea of what does this relationship look like externally, what is the expectation of this relationship and what it should be, what it is, versus what do we actually have, what memories do I actually hold here, what effect does this actually have on my life, how does this fit into my experience of the world and my experience of you, contrasted with that, what theoretically is this relationship?
And especially when we see this, again, contrasted with Shanae's new growing found family, because I think at this point, it's safe to say that Noel is part of this found family. And despite the, road bumps going on, I think we can still count Dieter. And even though like she's not their associate, I think we will probably see that in the future as they resolve things. Because,
Or like
they are the people who came to her aid. Like,
maybe he's like a little cousin off to the side.
Yeah, he's a little cousin that she hasn't quite grown that full fondness, but it'll happen. It'll happen.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I feel like
he's on kind of the periphery of his family, where like her other close family members are really close with him. He's in the family, he's around, but they're not directly that close yet.
I think there's something very pointed about the fact that those are the three who are there with her when she catches Shin-ae breaking into her house, right? Like this is the found family. This is the new family. This is the family that she lost, the family who she doesn't even know if she should even believe that this person is who she says that she is, right? Um, and you know, like the thing that I'm getting at here is these are people who are very willingly forming a relationship with her, right? I mean, you know, we know that Noel's reasons weren't exactly truthful. He was being kind of deceitful at that time, but we also know that by this point, Noel was acting on very honest, you know, intentions. Like at this point,
And
he was at that point of I had realized that the friendships had become real. I was acting on them.
I mean, he started acting on that realness, like he started acting on it genuinely and unwillingly, ultimately. Where like
Right.
he was willing because he realized that he did want her friendship, even though he didn't start it out actually wanting it. He never
Right.
would have gotten to the point in which and the amount to which he opened up to her if he didn't actually want it and like take some comfort and solace in having it. So even though he kept lying to himself, you know, like you
Right.
said, it became real without him knowing, but it can't become real without him having a willingness for it to be real.
And pointedly, he was making the effort. And he was making the effort in daylight, unlike what Shin-ae is doing. And I think, again, that's also a very good point of contrast is, you know, Shin-ae has been in this point in her life where she has always felt like she's been like the cast off, the throwaway, the left behind. You know, here's Shin-ae who is literally skulking around in her life, literally tiptoeing through the shadows of her life, breaking into her house, sneaking around. And here are people who actually come to her face, and I feel like there's something that is so strong about that juxtaposition about, you know, people who are showing her this actual intention of wanting to be in her life. And again, we know that Shin-ae believes that she is justified. We know that she believes that she has reasons to act this way. We know that she believes that this is the only way that she can do it. But, you know, it's ultimately, she never, you know, she never has Shin-ae like, you know, meet me in this, you know, public place together. Like, you know, it could have been like, let's meet at this mall together, right? You know, it she never gives Shin-ae that security, whereas these three boys are giving her that security. You know, like she may have that wariness with cousin Soshi right now, but you know, he's going to give her that security. I believe in it. I know it. Justice for Soshi.
It's like when push comes to shove, as mad at him as she is, and as much as they're not really emotionally close like the others, she does know that he's still got their backs.
Right. And like honestly, she's mad at him because she needs somebody to be mad at. Like
And also
this isn't the
because
episode
like
for it, but like Shin-ae is just mad at the world right now.
oh yeah, she's so feral.
She needs to take her feelings out. She feels like she has to be mad at him on Noel's behalf. Um she doesn't know Soshi's circumstances yet. I'm sure once they talk, once Soshi has his little heart to heart and he explains things to her the way that he has a theater, she will, you know, like come around. Like so
And I mean,
we know she's the most understanding character that we've got so far.
and oh gosh, what was I about to say? And she's ultimately like so much of why she's mad at him is that feeling of betrayal that like I did trust you. I did think that you had our backs and maybe you actually didn't. Like should I not have trusted you? Where like I do agree that I think she's going to be able to actually like have conversations with it and move past it. And it's built partly as a contrast to Noel and Alyssa when Shin-ae says like I I don't hold anything against Alyssa as a person for what happened. Like, yeah, it really hurt me. And like clearly dealing with the trauma of it, which that part she's not so much acknowledging. But the like, you know, I believe there had to have been reasons, right? Like I don't think she would have done this without actually like feeling feelings and like having reasons. And I can't believe that they were as cruel as they looked, which she's right about. Like seeing through a bit of not her perspective because we didn't really get it. Um, but like seeing through the context clues around Alyssa
Mm-hmm.
and the way that she was behaving in the flashbacks and the way that she talked about it in 243 and the way that she like had the way that her memories are formed around Yui and how anxious and uncomfortable she gets, we can see that very much like Soshi, like it wasn't her intention for things to go the way that they did. She had those kind of intentions of playing it to where everyone ultimately wins. and it not being possible. Whereas with Soshi, yeah, Shin-ae one of our chat members said that she acknowledges that there are two sides to the story, which Shin-ae is trying to convey to Noel early, and Noel, when she tells her story, and then when he sees Alyssa, he disrespects Shin-ae's wishes of not holding it against her and not using it as fuel in his own fire, and goes after Alyssa for it, and doesn't listen to her, doesn't hear her out. And then a couple of chapters later, Shin-ae, who was originally saying, like, there's two sides to every story, you know, people don't do things without a reason, like that she kind of has to believe that ultimately people are good underneath, and if she can feel that someone's a good person and something bad happens, she has to believe that there was a reason and the reason wasn't malicious, which she's often right about with people. That's, you know, what we've talked about before with her, like, being the light. This same person who said all that to Noel and would be really upset with him for what he did in 243 is now looking at Soshi with these dagger eyes. And Soshi, who's clearly so guilt-ridden and so eaten up inside, and who really wasn't one of the people who hurt Noel, where, like, we've conjectured a lot of times that Noel would probably be kind of okay with it. Like, maybe a little betrayed, especially at this point with how he's currently feeling about things. But, you know, in general, where
depending on, like, how much of it he's already anticipated,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, like, ultimately, Soshi, we conjecture from the context that, you know, he's purposely being bad at his job. He's trying to find that, you know, kind of everyone wins solution where he gets what he needs to help out his family. Noel gets to live without Kosuke over his shoulder, and, like, Kosuke gets enough information and enough, like, human interaction to kind of settle
Some peace
him.
of mind. It's to feel a little bit like he has a friend. It's, you know, it's whatever. It's okay.
It's a little bit of that without actually giving away, you know, stuff that's important to Noel most of the time. Like, kind of keeping that balance to where it kind of benefits all three of them. And obviously, so she still feels guilty because he's still spying. But when you look at it from that kind of zoomed out perspective, it kind of is a good deal for all three of them.
It
in
is, like,
contrast to how
it
things were
genuinely
before.
is.
And Shin-ae, instead of, like, seeing any of Soshi's guilt or hearing any of what he's saying or thinking about any of why might he have done this, what might really be going on, what might be the wider context, she's just like, God, I'm so mad right now and I need someone to be mad at, and how can everyone in this ginger boy that I love's life be so horrible to him and you? And she's like, you're here and you betrayed him. And
it's just so funny because, like, Shin-ae is, like, in that very teenage mindset of, like, I'm the only person who cares about him. I'm like, baby girl, go take 5 naps, please. And I guess, you know, it does show, like, how, you know, Noel very much is part of that found family to her. Like, you know, we know that. Like, we have waxed poetic so much about them. I don't think we need to spend 2 hours on the podcast explaining that, but, you
Dream
know,
I
I'm
Love
putting
You
it
too
out
with
there.
Trashellie episode 9.
Like, it's I love her. She needs to be a little feral, but I also at my big age need her to take a nap, you know?
It's like she needs to be feral right now. And we said this in the Shin-ae and Noel character dive episode, I think. Where, like, she needs to be a little bit feral right now. She needs to get this out. She needs to be her teenage self and let herself feel all her emotions. Which, this is now a little bit of a tangent off, but she needs to be in her feelings. It's really important for her and really important for her character growth and really important for her age development, because she's been, you know, shoving herself in that box for so long, and there's a lot going on. But, you know, those of us who aren't teenagers anymore, it's like,
those of us who already did that phase.
Been there, done that. Ugh. It's like,
ooh, girl.
Like, baby girl, you really need this, but maybe I don't. Maybe I don't need to be here.
Maybe I don't need it, right? But to try and bring it back to topic,
yeah, remember, I would just like to say again, like, for everyone who, I know there are people who listen to this and think that we go in every single week with absolutely no outlines, scripts, or anything whatsoever. That is the scripted version. we keep ourselves at least closely adjacent to the topic on our tangents when we have the written. This is the real train of thought.
We just have a lot of thoughts, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is just to be like, here are my thoughts, I'm putting them into the world. If it's important to you, cool. If it's not, skip ahead a little bit. Skip ahead a little head. There's going to be a new thought. There's going to be another thought.
Just keep going until
but,
the topic changes.
but I do think that there's something very pointedly interesting in the fact that her newfound family, the boys, are very pointedly contrasted against, you know, her sister. I think we can even compare that with Simhan, right? Because we talked about a lot of his failings in our last episode, but I think at this point it we can throw him some cookies, right? For all of his failings, Simhan tries, and he tries really hard, right? What we talked about last week, or not last week, but last episode, was that ultimately most of Simhan's issues are that circumstances are out of his hands, right? That there are things that have spiraled out as a result of those circumstances, and we do hold him accountable for those things. But ultimately, he is somebody who is trying, and at his core, he wants to try to give Shin-ae everything that he can. Unfortunately, a lot of what he wants to give her are things that are impossible, right? He cannot give her the life where all she has to do is study and get herself into a good school and go off and get a good degree and get a good job. That's what he wants to give her. That's not the life they have. That's not the luxury that they can afford. And it's just, like we talked to a lot about how what Shin-ae wants from him is for him to be open about everything. And for him, that's very difficult because it's a matter of pride. It's a matter of shame. It's very difficult to open up about your failings and about your weaknesses. It's even more difficult to do that to your child, not just because, you see your child as someone lesser than you, because I don't think that's his case at all, but just because
You
on
want to
some
provide
level he
for
knows,
them.
right, he feels that he's failed her, and he's failed her in the ways that are really important, and all of the ways that he wanted to make sure he didn't. He is somebody who, not to say that he ruined his life, but in a way sometimes it feels that way, right? Like you have a child too young, you kind of get saddled with that kid, you don't have that chance to go back to school, and then when you do finally get to go back to school, an accident happens, and like you can't use that money to continue school because you've got to take care of your daughter and the medical bills. He wanted to make sure she didn't have that life. He wanted to make sure that she wasn't going to be somebody who also gets pregnant young. He wanted to make sure that she's going to be somebody who gets that college education that he didn't get. And he can't even afford to get her that far. He feels like he's failed. And like that's one of those parts where I feel really empathetic, right? Like I mean, I also understand why Shin-ae feels so hurt by his inability to be honest and to open up, but like on the other hand, we understand, right? And like that's what I'm getting at here, is that it's like I don't completely begrudge him, right? Like he's trying to be a good father and he's trying to be there for her. I think as far as parents and I Love You go, there are probably worse parents we could have. I know that's not
Certainly.
saying a lot. I know that's not saying a lot. And
Kimchi
it's
really
not
likes
like
her problematic parents, and she said that directly.
right.
She
And
very directly called herself out on that. She was like, "I just really like writing flawed parents."
and to be fair, they are the ones who create the most compelling story and therefore the most interesting story with their children, because that's where we get our conflict. Um, but what I'm trying to get at is, the relationship Shin-ae has with her father versus that lack of relationship with her sister, right? And how, we've kind of talked about how Yui looking in on Shin-ae's life kind of can see, probably looks at Shimhan and it's like, you are the reason that Shin-ae's life sucks. You are the source of all of her problems. You are the source of all of her failings. You have failed her. You have fucked her life up. You, sir, suck, and I'm going to make sure that I can separate from her, or I can sever her from you, and I'm going to take her under my wing. She's my child now. And when I say my child, I mean my child in the same way that Kosuke is her child, you know?
Yeah,
like
molding her.
Right. We know that Yui, like, you know, she hates men. She's going to hate everything about Shimhan, despite the fact that he, you know, he may not always be available for shin-ae, but we know that he's like emotionally available to her. You know, she's able to open up to him. She herself may close herself off, but we have seen her open up to him in like ways like, I'm gonna be honest, I've never opened up to my parents. Like, I'm just gonna say that.
They
Like,
genuinely care about each other, and they
right.
feel that each other care about each other. Where they might not
Right.
always be partners, they might be in conflict, they might be hiding stuff. Like they might not always be on the same level, and they might feel resentment or burdenship to each other, but none of that gets in the way of feeling that each other cares about them and wants to have a relationship with them and loves them and wants to provide for them.
Right. And like, as far as like our blood relationships go, like, they have the most like openly healthy, I guess, as far as our healthy blood relationships go. Because, you know, like, let's, you know, compared to like Rand and Noel, right? Because we know that Rand loves Noel, but does Rand show it? No. Can Rand show it? No. Does Rand find any possible way to show it? Not in a way that Noel can decipher. Does he find the most convoluted ways to try to show it? Yes, and in a language that Noel will never, ever, ever understand. Like, you know, like, right, like, how many times has it taken us to read things before we can go, you know what, I think there's some double language going on. Like, if you squint your eye and you read it this way, you might be able to get this sense, you know? Like, Shin-ae and Shimhan have a healthy relationship as far as parent and child can go. Like, I stand by it. But of course, go on.
I was gonna say, and I think like when we really zoom out into I Love You, it's like you said very early on, it's really clear that family is what the story is about. Like,
right.
I think we said it in the last episode. Maybe we said it somewhere else.
I think it might have been a voice chat last week.
It might have just been a random voice chat. I was like, I feel like we were talking, but
it was the voice chat last week because it was with Ren. It was about it was about how ultimately. So we talk a lot about the death flags, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about death flags. We know Rand's gonna die. Like, Rand, Nana, they're gonna die. We talk a lot about how Shimhan has death flags, but Ren brought up a really interesting point last week in our voice chat where we were supposed to be doing some really fun coloring pages. This is a fun thing that we do in our I Love You server. We were celebrating Shin-ae's birthday. Our member Kiko drew a really fun art piece with Shin-ae on a pizza slice. Elle was the only one actually doing the art. The rest of us were there for vibes. But Ren brought up a really interesting point about how she said she doesn't actually think Shimhan is going to die. And it led to a really interesting conversation about how a lot of the death flags could be more metaphorical, and perhaps they're not necessarily about Shimhan dying, but perhaps it's more about the relationship between Shin-ae and Shimhan deteriorating. And this is something that we've also talked about a lot too, that, you know, perhaps their relationship is going to splinter and, you know, they're going to go separate ways for a while. And the more that we talked about it, the more I was like, you know what, I actually really, really feel strongly about this, because, you know, we've also kind of like that parallel to Nessa and Nana, right? How they had a huge falling out and then they never got a chance to recover, right? Whereas Shin-ae and Shimhan might be the opposite, where they do sever, they do splinter, they do fall apart, except maybe in the future they get to do the opposite.
And I very much like believe this, honestly. And like I've always I'll joke that Shimhan is going to die, but I've always had a little bit of like kind of doubt in the Shimhan death flags. And I know we talked a long time about, and I think we did say this in the actual pod episode. Maybe not. I can't keep the puzzle voice.
We talk too much. We talk too much, guys.
Talk a lot. But we said this at some point where, like, if he did die, I think it would be both of our, like, first real glaring major criticism of Kimchi's
Oh,
writing. Like,
this.
I trust her on a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
I don't not trust her that she could write Simhan dying in a way that would make sense to me, but with what we have and with what I feel like I Love You is about, it feels not only narratively not necessary, but narratively contraindicated for me. And something
Yes.
else that I said in that voice chat, and part of the way that I conceptualize I Love You and how I Love You is ultimately about family, is that it feels to me like I Love You is kind of two stories that are intersecting. It's
Right.
the story of the relationship, the brother relationship between Noel and Kosuke, and the story of the father-daughter relationship between Simhan and Shin-ae. Because if we think about I Love You, like when we get rid of the fact that you have to have, all the Hiraharas shenanigans for a lot of what's happening. If we isolate the motivations for these characters and what they're really driven by and really attached to throughout the story and how their arcs kind of follow, you get those two tracks. You get Nolan Kosuke's family relationship and Shin-ae and
Mhm.
Simhan's family relationship. And it feels like when they've both collided and intertwined, they're following kind of similar trajectories where, like, we have this everything that they're doing at the beginning of the story is because of their relationships for each other. You know, Kosuke and Noel are having this conflict where, like, Kosuke's ultra big brothering him, and they both have some resentment for each other, and they're driven by this perception of who the other is and the role that they play in each other's lives and the implications of that. And we have, Shin-ae and Simhan in their financial struggles, in their family struggles, trying to support each other and not letting each other in because of reasons that we talked about last episode and a little bit this episode. And that being the thing that pushes Shin-ae into this whole narrative. She goes to the formal and she says it screaming at one point that she just wanted to help her dad. And he is in his coma because he couldn't cope with not being able to provide for her. And so they start with all their motivations being about each other and the situation they're in ultimately being because of the way that their relationship has impacted their lives. And then we start to go through a period of peace but distance. And then at the end of that, the emotions that have been kind of held back to lead to that peace that had not been able to cross are being unleashed. And we expect a falling out. We expect a falling out between both of these pairs. And it kind of like, I have to live my own life. I can't keep being bound by what you mean to me. And a kind of push towards a future, but a separation of sorts. And we expect that in both pairs. And then at the end, we expect a reconciliation between both of them and a coming back to family for each other. And I think this is also very evident in we definitely talked about this in the voice call, the balcony scene in the
Yes.
mid-season premiere where the fandom really hyped it up and got mad at Kimchi for not delivering what they wanted.
Because people thought it was so much going to be about like Shanae's romantic choice and like thought it was going to be a romantic moment, and it turns out that no, this is about the backbone of the story, and the backbone
Right.
is Shanae's relationship with her father.
Right, where Kimchi makes that very deliberate choice to put Simhan on the balcony and make sure that they have their talk before Noel re-enters the story. And
And
it's
it
like,
meant so much.
right, it's such a big point for them, and so much comes out in that moment. And that, like, when we look at both these parallel trajectories running with these two relationships and the way that I Love You is structured, the themes that Kimchi has been hitting on, and the way that she's writing all these characters, and then we add in that it is Simhan and Shin-ae up on that balcony in the mid-season premiere, it feels very, very much like the theme and, like you said, backbone of I Love You is this concept of family and what family means to you and what different things can mean family.
Yeah, I remember when you know earlier what you were saying too is when we were on that call, I think you went back to that conversation because it was you, me, and Bommy having a conversation because you read a quote that I don't remember saying, but I was like, oh my God, yeah, that sounds like me, where we had been talking about this, where that's exactly it. It feels like, so essentially, and I'm not going to say it as articulately as I said it back then, but the other thought I have is this, right? So, Sakyu are mirrors, right? Null losing Rand, it makes us expect that Shin-ae is going to lose Simhan too, right? But I feel like it's overkill, right? It
Yes.
feels like overkill because what do we gain by both Rand and Shin-ae losing their fathers? And you were kind of touching on this, right? For Noel, it's a huge thing because he, and I know we talked about this last week too, and it feels, I wish, like, this is, like I said, it was a voice chat that we had within our server. And once again, if you're listening on YouTube or Spotify and you want to be a part of these fun chats, like, we literally just like get in voice chat on the weekends because we're like, hey, we're bored, come talk to us. And then we're like, hey, I'm gonna be painting, and then of course we just start talking about I Love You.
I mean, we're
Come
all
join our
in here.
server.
We're all in here because we love I Love You. We talk all the time, and we get
All the
together.
time.
We start casually hanging out and talking about not I Love You things, and then obviously, inevitably, it comes back to I Love You, and then sometimes it's like, man, I wish we were recording this.
Right? So I'm going to paraphrase what we're talking about, but it's basically for Noel, and this is still very on topic, right? For Noel, Rand is his father, but he very much doesn't know him. Noel, yeah, Rand very much is Noel's father. He doesn't know him. When Rand dies, Noel has to make peace with a ghost because Rand was never his father. Like he was always a presence in his life from that point that he was a young kid, but Rand never got to be the father that he wishes he could have been. He never got to be that loving, affectionate, doting man that he wishes he could have been, and that, of course, Noel wishes he could have been. For Noel and Kosuke both, because this is like the real point of Noel and Kosuke grappling with their father's loss, is that losing Rand means coming to terms with who they are outside of those expectations, especially for Kosuke, who has spent his entire life trying to mold himself in the likeness of his father, in
So
the
burdened.
likeness of this man who he has believed is his father. Noel, in the same way that Kosuke believes he has to earn his father's affection, Noel kind of has too. He too has tried to float under the radar because he wants to at least be that good kid who's not going to be getting in trouble. At the very least, if he's not going to get his father's love, at least not earn his ire, right? For them to lose Rand means they have to make peace with the fact that they never had that and they never gained that and they never got the chance to do it, and now they have to do it without him. Now they have to make that peace. They have to make peace with the ghost, and they have to find a way to acknowledge that he did love them. We know Noel has that Bible. We know, and Kosuke will at some point get that watch. But for Shin-ae to lose Simhan, it doesn't mean the same thing. She knows he loves him. She knows that they have that relationship. If anything, she loses so much more. Like it doesn't strengthen her. Like for Kosuke and Noel, for better or worse, it does strengthen them. For Kosuke especially because he has to figure out who is he outside of trying to be a mini Rand? Who is he outside of trying to be somebody who pleases everybody else? Who is he outside of all of these expectations that everybody placed upon him? What are the things that he actually enjoys? What are the things that makes him happy? What does happy feel like? You
Aww.
know? I know, right? Like, oh, Kosuke, the feelings. But Shin-ae doesn't have that. And I see Rin
Like
has joined us, and I just want her to know that we are in fact talking about what she brought up last week. Narratively, it just doesn't make sense. And I think you even said this. It feels like overkill. It feels counterintuitive to what the story is about. What is Shin-ae fighting for if she loses her
right.
father? And I know we've played with this idea before about how maybe she could take Yui's offer to, save her father.
And
And
it's like,
maybe something happening to Shimhan could be what propels her. But like, honestly, I feel like if Shimhan died, would would Shin-ae even put herself in Yui's hands at that point? Like, would she even be like, okay, fuck it, witch, take me? Like, I feel like at that point, maybe she would just like do something so much more drastic.
and it's just ultimately when we have this narrative about, and so much of the relationship is about being able to open up and rely on each other. And we're likely going to watch something that, despite both of them kind of now really wanting to and wanting to try to, something that stops them and continues to force them to not be able to, and like actually ultimately take away that option from them, which is most likely going to be Yui's influence, where she's going to set it up in a way that makes Shin-ae have to take her offer and not be able to stay near Simhan, whether that's a relapse, whether that's just lack of being able to explain what's going on and actually go through this together, like whatever it is. Um, something is going to drive that rift where at this point they genuinely want to be partners and they can't. And part of their story is likely going to be about watching what they need to be able to actually come back together and reconcile in the end, and how the bonds that they have formed carry them through to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because we see this huge foundation between them where, as bad as things are, as terrible as their situation is, as much shame and resentment as they carry around each other, they, like you said, they have that relationship, they have that foundation. They have never doubted their love and care for each other. They have never doubted that the other wants to support them. But there are external factors that are going to make it really difficult, and internal things that need to be dealt with in order to truly get to a point of being able to support each other and reconcile. And
Mm-hmm.
what is the payoff if at the end they don't? Whereas, like you said, with Rand, the ultimate conclusion is these are two people who have struggled with their identity their whole lives, and their identity is tied to this concept of their father, a man they both barely know. And instead of daddy at the end being able to hold them and say it's all okay, they have to reconcile with his ghost, like you said, and who am I without this man that I've been trying to please my whole life? Whereas for Shin-ae and Simhan, it's like, how do I get to a point where the people that I care about and the people who care about me can actually support each other?
Right. I was so happy that we got to have that conversation last week, because I think, like, sometimes it's really easy to get swept up in some of the conversations. And, like, the more we talk about the death flags, the more sometimes you start to be like, oh, maybe this is really happening. But the more we start to think, maybe sometimes death flags are metaphorical. Maybe it's not so much about, him. Maybe it's about their relationship. Um, talking about how for Shimhan, a lot of it is more about his likeliness of relapsing, about the fact that this time he's making a very big deal about how this is going to be the last time he's going to try to get clean, and how we know that means either, okay, he's going to relapse or something bad's going to happen, and how we keep kind of jumping back to the, oh, something bad's going to happen. Whereas it feels more appropriate to think now that, yeah, he probably is going to relapse. That's Yui's role. She's here to make sure that Shin-ae, sees him as a dead end. She's here to make it look, to cause that strain, to push them apart, to make Shin-ae see, hey, you have to take this other option. You have to take this option that's going to put you in my grasp. Um, and ultimately, it is going to sever their relationship, not just because he has failed her yet again, but because she's going to be taking a route that he didn't provide. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
does it mean for her to go a route that he tried so hard and he failed, and now she's taking somebody else's essentially handout. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, because, like,
No, we've
girl,
talked a
you gotta
ton
take,
about how, yeah,
you
she's
gotta do
got
what you
to.
gotta do. But right, like, how there's going to be a part of him that's probably going to see it that way, even if he doesn't truly think that's what it is. That way that like you have a gut reaction, and that doesn't mean that's how you think something is, but like that's going to
And I
be
mean
them. Like,
that was Shin-ae's gut reaction, and she's the
right,
one who's going to
right.
take the deal.
I just, like the more we talk about it, like even right now talking about it, it's just, I Love You is so much about those relationships. And like you said, even on the Hirahara side of it, it's not about the Hiraharas. It's about Noel and Kosuke.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's like the
again, like,
Hiraharas are what's allowing these conflicts to be propelled through, and what's
right. It drives the
continuing to
conflict.
collide these people together. But like the story isn't about Yui. The story is not about Gun Kim. The story isn't about it isn't really about the company. It's about the way that these family relationships are trapped within that framework.
Like even thinking about, what 212 means. And, I say all the time that like weirdly enough, 212 gives me so much hope for the reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I kind of touched on this, and I don't think I ever got around to like fully developing this thought. But back to like the Shin-ae and Shin-hye versus like Noel and Kosuke, how thinking about them in those contrasts also gives me so much optimism for the future of Noel and Kosuke's relationship and being able to repair. Because like you said, like so much of their conflict is the fact that they want a relationship, but at the same time, they are beholden by like their circumstances, right? It's the way that Kosuke craves that brotherhood so much, but is so afraid of what it means and everything that he's been taught to believe it implies.
Mm-hmm.
And just knowing that ultimately, yeah, that is the trajectory of this story. It's that Kosuke and Noel have both been reaching to each other this whole time, even though I want to say like even though they're not like speaking the same language, but that metaphor doesn't make any sense. But
It's yeah, it's like they're reaching for each other, but they're afraid to take each other's hand.
Right. It's like cats, when they like reach out and touch each other and then they slap,
We
but
slap
then
each
like
other.
they also reach back out. Like that's them. That's Noel and
Yeah.
Kosuke. And I just feel like seeing these two as like the prominent relationships just makes me feel something, because like I know like you and I are like really we're big shippers. I know we are, but like the more we talk about I Love You, I think the more we always settle back to like these are like the relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I
And
could
it's
talk all
like,
day about them clearly.
and like what I said the other day was that I definitely conceptualize I Love You in a very broad, zoomed out, simplified sense as, like I said earlier, these two plot lines converging, the Simhan and Shanae's family relationship and Nolan Kosuke's family relationship. And what is ultimately like being one of the things that ties them, and what is a result of that collision, and a very big result of it, is the Stalker relationship. But
Right.
that's not what the story's about. That's a tie in the
It's
story.
an
It's
intersection.
right. Like that's that's that thread running through them that's actually sewing the two sides together. But that's not one of the sides. So like very,
Right.
very prominent, really important. Obviously, like you said, we as much as some people these days don't tend to believe anymore, because don't we don't wax poetically about it as much anymore, because A, it's not happening as frequently in the plot right now. It's just not as relevant, and B, we're having fun dissecting other things. But when 219 came out was the day that Ashley got muted in the old Discord server for 14 hours for sending too many emotes. Um, so I promise you,
Listen,
we have some very big feelings about Nolan Shanae, and especially Nolan Shanae together as well. Even if it doesn't seem like it these days, we still have them.
the
But
funny thing is, because I was about to say, like talking about those intersections is how we also have the other intersection of Kosuke and Shin-ae, and how I think they are going to be probably just as, if not almost as important as Noel and Shin-ae's relationship. And like, I stand by that. This is something that we also talk a lot about in just like our regular voice chat sessions. We here in the server, but especially like Elle and I and Kiko, are very, very, very big on the, you know, if you look at my Tumblr, you already know this. If you look at my Reddit comments and posts, you've probably seen this. Like, Shin-ae is going to be the bridge between Noel and Kosuke. We know that. Shin-ae is the light. We've been here. We've talked about it. But the more that we like talk about this, the more that I think about it, the more I'm like, Shin-ae and Kosuke are going to have such an important relationship. Like, it's not going to be just that bridging. It's not going to be just that. You know, she is somebody who helps him, you know, come out of that darkness. It's going to be, and I believe Elle puts it like this a lot, that Shin-ae is one of the only people, well, pretty much is the only person currently in Kosuke's life with no obligation to him. I mean, like, now they're employees, but like, we're gonna disregard that bit for a moment,
and he
right?
clearly
Because like,
doesn't seem
that
to be
came
counting
after.
that. And
because it came after.
It came after, and also he knows that she hates her job.
That too. That's right.
He knows
She's
that
trying
she
to
wants
get out
quit.
of the job.
She doesn't even want to keep this job.
She's trying to get out of this job. Right. Like, you know, everyone else in Kosuke's life is obligated to him in some way, right? Like, even if we know, because, you know, like, listen, we know how much Hansuke loves him. We know. We want Kosuke to see how much Hansuke loves him, but Kosuke can't see it. Like, it's family obligation. Shin-ae is the only person who doesn't want something from Kosuke. She's got no ulterior motives. She doesn't want his money. She doesn't want to have his babies. She doesn't want to marry into his family. She doesn't want a job. She definitely doesn't want a job higher up in the company. She's not trying to use him. She doesn't want anything. And it baffles him, and he wants more of it. And I don't mean that in like a romantic way. I mean, he craves human contact. Kiko will go on about this forever. If you're not in the server and you want to talk about it, join it. She'll be down to talk to you about it at any time.
Kiko is, for anyone who's not familiar with Kiko, she is our amazing podcast artist. So any of the little art that you have seen of the two of us floating around, which actually I'll take this opportunity to say it, we never told you guys who's who. And it's kind of really funny to watch people guess in our Discord server. But I will spoil it all for you right now. I, Elle, am the one with the long dark hair and like the rosy cheeks. And Ashley is the one with the short curly copper hair. So that's who's who. It's been
sorry
really
for
fun.
the people who thought incorrectly or were confused about that.
It's okay.
Sorry for the deception.
Sorry for the deception. But yeah, Kiko is our lovely artist who has drawn all of the art that you have seen of the two of us, and she is Kosuke Hirahara's #1 fan. And I mean that in the absolute best way possible. She like really, really cares about Kosuke as a character in the way that Kimchi has written him, and sees him very much for who he is and the potential that he has. And I wanted to read kind of out one of the conversations we had a while ago, because you now that we're actually talking about this here, because I said this in the discussion channel, because we have a discussion channel related to the podcast in our Discord, because sometimes people will make comments when they're listening back to the recording, and some people like some people like to comment on YouTube, and we try to read everything, and if at least leave a like, if not interact. You guys are awesome, and like I know a lot of times I just hit the the love button because there's only so much energy we have in the week, but we appreciate all of the comments, and we do read all of them.
Also, we're just genuinely floored by how many of you there are.
I may or may not have updated Ashley on some of the numbers, because when I go to upload the videos, I see them, and it may or may not have given her such a like an impact / anxiety moment that we may or may not have started this podcast a full hour late. That's not the whole reason, but for as verbose as we are on the podcast, we are also verbose in all other aspects of our lives when we choose to talk. But Yeah, but I wanted to read this out, which we were talking about in our discussion channel around the Kolissa episode, I think it was, because we were talking about this concept of platonic love and like the experience these characters have, and we didn't say this. And I said something and then you said something back, and I feel like this is a good place to read it because it's basically what you were trying to talk about. Where I said, um, part of what makes Kosuke and Shanae's relationship important is that it hinges on it not being romantic. And that hinges on it not being romantic is that it creates even more of an impact to the fact that she cares for, accepts, and stays by him. Romantic feelings to Kosuke would likely feel like another condition, very much how he sees Hansuke's love as conditional because they're family. A romantic attraction creates a reason to stay by Kosuke, something to bind her to him and blind her to his faults. But without the romance, she stays beside him because she just sees value in him. She just cares because she cares. There's no external reason he can find for her caring about him to explain it away, but she does it anyway. She still cares about him and he can't explain it away. And especially from someone who does have romantic feelings for Noel, who makes Noel feel special and has Noel as a special person in her life. Well, Noel has that need to feel special to someone. Kosuke has a need to feel loved without it being because she's special, without it being because he's met some sort of condition. For her to love Noel, the person that Kosuke has been so afraid of overshadowing him, and still have enough love to give that she provides Kosuke that unconditional love to prove wrong what he thought as a child, that no one can love him once they've met the great Noel, that Kosuke will always be overshadowed, that there is just fundamentally not enough love to go around, to do what Rand couldn't, and to do what Kosuke didn't think Rand was capable of. Every single factor promoting Kosuke's insecurities and feelings that he was not good enough to be loved, combated by Shin-ae staying by him anyway and providing that genuine acceptance, is going to be so, so special and so important. And then you came back with saying that somebody had mentioned kind of viewing it as like a little sister. And you came back and said, even further, she isn't his sister, because that's something about Hansuke, where we often talk about Hansuke with Kosuke, where he really is this person who cares so much about Kosuke and has this unconditional love for him, and Kosuke can't even see it because he sees just being family as a condition that has been met, that obligate family love. Where he said that Shin-ae is someone with absolutely no obligations, no desires, no ulterior motives, someone who cares about him selflessly with no demands or expectations in return. She is someone who cares about him because it's him, because he is a person who is deserving of love and care too.
He is deserving.
And yeah, we have these two threads running, and Noel and Shin-ae meeting each other is what intersected them. If Shin-ae and Kosuke had met without Noel being involved, they probably wouldn't have continued being in each other's lives at first, because really what kept bringing her back to the Hiraharas was this stupid redheaded boy dragging her into it again. But for Shin-ae and Noel to form that romantic relationship, and then her also form that caring and loving and unconditional relationship with Kosuke, those two things running simultaneously means so much and is so important. And Stalk used the thread that propelled that, and it's still important there because it accentuates what they would have had. Even if Noel's not in the, if she didn't know Noel, if she wasn't, presumably going to have this romantic relationship with Noel, all the rest of that remains true. She still is able to fill that same role in Kosuke's life and to be kind of that person who can break through that barrier for him that no one else has been able to, that allows him to start recognizing and feeling the love that these other people already have for him, that he hasn't been able to fully, take in. Just let the love, kind of, it's like she is able to drill through the lid of this box or canopy that he's been living under and let the sun reach him. All this love that he should have been able to take in that he just wasn't able to, that there was a wall in the way. She breaks through that wall and allows all this support network to be able to form around him, because he can't form it right now. There's too much in the way. And that could happen without her being romantically involved with Noel. But the fact that she is, again, makes it so much more prominent, because so much of what built that wall was the belief that he could never be loved when someone has known Noel, that the sun will always gravitate to him and Kosuke will naturally just be in the shadow. And like, this is, Noel being next to him, soaking up all those rays in Kosuke's mind. And someone breaks the drill and he thinks that all that's going to be above it is shadow, and there's sunlight.
I'm really emotional right now.
I'm sorry.
Like, it just, and I'm not sure if he'll quite get it, but like I want them to be a trio. I don't think it'll go that way. I don't know. Like, I know we waffle on this a lot. I know we talk about it. Like, will it go that way? Will things go different directions? But I want it, Like, if we're not thinking about, like what is likely and what is, what makes sense, what's more narratively possible. I want it, especially like, because I know things that we've talked about is how, how gratifying it would be to see Kosuke be part of who takes Yui down, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
of course we want Noel to be the person, because Noel has been so, his whole life has been crushed by Yui, but so has Kosuke's, right? And especially for Kosuke, who has essentially been that little robot that Yui made specifically because she wants him to carry out this mission and for him to basically backfire and work against her. Like, I still want that so badly. Just the idea of them banded together, it always gets to me. And I know it's like kind of a little like too feel goody for like what I Love You is, but it's like you said, for Kosuke to be able to stand there and not be enshrouded in Noel's shadow, and to know that it turns out love is not in fact like a pizza, and that it is not in fact a finite resource, and that it turns out it's
The sun can
infinite.
shine on them
People,
both.
right? I and this is something that like I'm going to like draw all the way back to the very opening of this episode, with talking about Kosuke not being Rand's son. So much of what used to propel this conversation in the past was the Kosuke hate and the hope that him not being Rand's son was kind of like justification for Rand not being the father that he should have been. And like, we're so far beyond that point that it feels kind of like murky to talk about this, because it's hard to kind of like remember the order of things. And it's kind of hard to talk about things after the fact when we're kind of more removed from things. But like, before, we had a clearer image of just how how tied Rand's hands are. Just like the people who want to play that angle of, oh, Rand has probably suspected it all along, and that's why he was always distant towards Kosuke, which you and I have discussed before. And A, gross. B, we know Rand has actually tried everything he could to be as close to Kosuke as he could be. See what kind of person justifies the whole "this is your father," because ultimately that's the thing, right? Whether or not Rand is biologically his father, he raised Rand, or he
Right.
raised
Like,
Kosuke.
that's his father.
That's his father. And like, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is Rand is the person who raised Kosuke. Rand is the person who Kosuke saw as his father.
And it's like, it's similar to how not many people, but a couple of people, when the Park family started to merge with the Yu family, were like,
oh,
Janae's gonna have a mother now, like everything's gonna be so much better, and like kind of acting like Mina dating and potentially marrying Simhan gets rid of like everything that's wrong, like all these mommy issues that she has. And it's like, but that doesn't change the fact that she spent 17, 18 years with the relationship with her biological mother that she has, and the lack of that relationship. That doesn't automatically make Mina a mother to her. Where like, we know that she sees Mina as a support in her life, but she doesn't seem to see Mina as a mother. And similarly with Kosuke and Rand, where like, Rand not being his biological father doesn't negate the past 24 years of seeing Rand as his father and being raised by and neglected by Rand. It doesn't change, like, it doesn't change his concept of that. It doesn't change what he holds from that. And it doesn't, unless they let it, it doesn't change their relationship moving forward, because that's his dad. Like, it's all about, who do you conceptualize as parental figures in your life?
Right. And I just think there's something so, I guess, fascinating about this, because it's like the people who are so close to Kosuke in his life, right? The father that he's tried to be, the brother that he has both yearned for and loathed. um how there's kind of like that contrast, right? Like we know he's never going to ultimately reach that father, because the death flags, right? He's doomed
Well,
by the narrative. But
the
on the
death
other
flags that we
hand,
think are actual death flags, not
right.
metaphorical death flags.
um
Both can go either way, but
and
y'all know where we lean.
we made it a little obvious. And how, like, they're both in that same situation, right? Where they're both people who Kosuke was raised to see as family. I mean, like, we just had that conversation about how he went like 10, 12 years of his life not seeing Nola as a brother until he was forced to. But at this point, he has spent many years seeing Nola as his brother, being pushed into this role and, trying to recoil out of it. Whereas, with Rand, he has tried so hard to fit that mold. He's doing everything he can to try and squeeze in there. And how, ultimately in the end, we fully believe that he and Noel are going to be able to reconcile. And I think that there's something really fascinating about how, these are both relatives who are not blood related, and how, we are going to ultimately see that for Kosuke, it is those found families that are going to be so important. Like, Kosuke doesn't have what Shin-ae has. He doesn't have, I mean, caveat, because again, it's so funny, because, like, I feel like I can trust that everyone listening knows my stances on things, but I still always feel like I have to be like, asterisk, let me make myself clear.
Let
We
me make
know
sure
Rand
there's
loves.
no way to misconstrue it.
Right? We know Rand loves Kosuke, and we know that he wishes he could be the kind of father that Shimhan tries to be to Shin-ae. We know that he tried to encourage Kosuke to be the person he wants to be. We know that he encouraged him to follow his dreams and probably would have loved to help nurture his dreams, but he was not given those opportunities, and he was boxed out of that. And his role as, the businessman did not leave him the time or space for that. But from Kosuke's perspective, in Kosuke's sad, soggy shoes, he doesn't have what Shin-ae has. And, we saw that at the tteokbokki stand when, Shin-ae was saving some of her small little portion of her tteokbokki to bring back to her father. So because he loves this too, and she wanted to share something with him. And it was something so foreign to him, because he doesn't have that relationship of sharing something with his father, of like having this relationship where they share things, where, you know,
And that he wants it so bad.
right,
Like,
he
and
craves that.
he talked about in his episode, and I won't spend too much time on it, but like, he not only craves it and has never gotten it, and has, focused his entire life on wanting it, he was made to feel guilty for wanting it. He was made to feel like that's lesser and that he's not allowed, and he's better for not having this thing that he so desperately craves and needs.
And so, like, he doesn't have any of that. And I think that makes it, I don't know, there's just something so, I don't want to say it's sad, because it's not. Like, I think we've made it very clear that found family is a very, very important element. Sometimes that is all people have. That is all Kosuke has. He, his sorry excuse of a mother was never a mother to him, and he is learning and figuring that out. And he has such a warped sense of family and obligation at this point that blood family really doesn't have the same weight that found family does. I
And
think
especially if his blood family turns out to be
right, because that's another thing that we haven't really gone as much into detail yet. Like, what does it mean for Kosuke if, his family are the Kims and his found family is Noel and Shin-ae? That again is like because I think we're seeing the tables flip between Noel and Kosuke, right? Where Kosuke is now taking Noel's position. Um, but I don't think it's going to be in the same way where Noel kept trying to, reach out to Kosuke and kind of make attempts. I think, we're going to see Kosuke kind of take his position and be like, I deserve this. I guess very much like Noel. I deserve this. I belong here. This is what I deserve. Um, I do think ultimately, when it comes to reconciliation, it's going to be Noel who has to reach out to him and bridge it, because he's the person who, he's the one who's like, I'm done. I don't need you anymore. I'm not going to bother trying. I've tried all these times. He's closed that door. He's got to open it again.
Yeah, and as much as we're empathetic and sympathetic to Kosuke, that also comes with acknowledging that like Kosuke is the one who really burnt that bridge. Like Noel was trying to reach out and was genuinely trying to be, a brother and a friend to him. And we know what was happening in Kosuke's mind. We know how afraid he was and why he burnt that bridge and the beliefs that he thought were true and justified it that weren't. And that lets us be empathetic to him as a person. But he was still the one who burnt that bridge. So it has to be where the person on the other end says, I would like to rebuild this instead of walking away. And I think that's a lot of what's going to resign Kosuke to his kind of like, I deserve this role. And we're seeing it right now already. Where
like the fact that he couldn't even say anything to Noel when
right.
he met him at the hospital. He wanted to, but he couldn't.
Right, like he genuinely at this point wants to repent for what happens and wants to build something better. And even though he's not at the point to have a healthy relationship with Noel, he's not there yet. He doesn't have, both of them are not there right now, but even Kosuke on his own isn't at a point where he's ready for a healthy relationship with Noel yet. But he now knows that he wants one, and he knows that he was standing in the way of it before, and that he does have a lot of blame in this, and he needs to apologize in a way that Noel will accept and forgive him if they're going to build something. But he feels so guilty and ashamed because of that conflict between now understanding fully what he did and not that he's not running away from it at all, but not running away from it like he was.
Right.
While still really wanting to reach out and build that relationship, that having to try to rectify that all together. And in the end, I think he is settling on and is going to settle on that, like, understanding that if Noel isn't in a place to reach out to him, he has lost the right to reach out to Noel. Like, not that it's that simple, but in very basic terms. And we saw that with the whole, I have no brother, where he knows where they're at. He knows what happened. He knows that he was a lot of it.
I feel like I'm just going to say, I feel like people really misinterpret that, because like people still saw it as Kosuke being an asshole and saying, like he doesn't have a brother in the same way that like I don't want him, and not the whole, no, he doesn't have a brother because his brother finally excommunicated him, because his brother has finally cut him off. Right.
He doesn't deserve his brother.
Right, like that was the moment that Kosuke realized he has driven Noel away. He has fucked everything up beyond repair. Like that little moment gets to me, and not because I'm a Kosuke sympathizer, but because it's like
you are,
Kosuke has like Kosuke has had so many moments like that before, but that was supposed to be the pointed moment where we realized that this is different than before, that this is him realizing Noel has severed the tie. This is done. He fucked up. And like
he can't just come running back this time.
Right. Like that's like his whole, like, okay, so you know how like people call, like their sad characters like their little poor meow meows, but people are actually using it wrong because like your poor meow meow is supposed to be like the character who has actually done like unspeakable, like horrible things, and you're actually, like that. That's like Kosuke's poor meow meow moment is like
Yeah.
he has done all of these awful horrible things, and now it's like look at him, he's so
He's so
soggy, he's
sad.
so soggy.
And it's that, like, I know we've talked about before, and this is kind of another parallel between Kosuke and Rand, where they do share a lot of similarities despite not being related because like Kosuke always looked to Rand. Rand raised Kosuke, where they both have a bit of that tendency, especially around Noel, of too little, too late. Where like, yeah, you're ready and you're reaching out now, and you're trying to take responsibility for everything that happened and like be genuine and really sad. But where was this when the time was actually there? Like now I've moved on. Like life doesn't happen on your timeline.
And I guess I think that's what's going to be so significant for Noel to reach out to Kosuke in the future. Because again, I still feel like obviously it's not going to happen anytime soon because, Noel's gonna go anti-hero, he's gonna do some awful things, he's gonna have some parallels people aren't gonna like, people are gonna have to, reel him back in. I think at some point in time he's going to have to grapple with what it means for Kosuke to have also been Yui's victim and what that means for himself, Noel. And I think that's going to be part of what leads to him reaching out to Kosuke. Because, at some point in time, he like, again,
and like
asterisk.
Oh.
I was just going to say, like, again, asterisk, this is not me saying that this justifies the things that Kosuke has done. This is not me saying that this is not me saying that Noel is going to forgive him and forget. What I'm saying is I think at some point in time, Noel is going to have an understanding of what drove Kosuke to behave the way he did and to do the things he did, to have better understanding of the environment that Kosuke was living in and how he was able to see Noel as that threat and how, what drove him to ultimately treat him like that threat. Again, it doesn't justify things. Noel may never forgive him for that, but I think it will help him see Kosuke in a different light. Because again, Noel has always viewed things as Kosuke and Yui versus him. To realize that, Yui has always been puppeting all of them, that she's been playing with all of them, even Rand, I think will alter his perceptions, and I think it will help him understand things a little bit better, like in the same way that Shin-ae doesn't have any closure because she doesn't understand why the things that happened to her have happened. She doesn't understand why people treat her the way that they did because of things that her mother has done. I don't even know that she knows that the way she was bullied had anything to do with her mother. Why Alyssa treated her the way that she did. It's that lack of closure and that lack of understanding. And just being able to have that and go, okay, I get it. It doesn't mean that it's justified or that you forgive it, but I think that's going to be something that helps them with that healing process. And I think that's going to be that very significant factor for when Noel does reach out to Kosuke. Because again, it's like that sense of obligation. Because again, like so far from that point that we were making, it's for Kosuke and Noel, who are they're not blood related, right? Like this is that big reveal. If he's not Rand's son, that means he's not Noel's brother, which means Noel has no obligation to him. So just like Shin-ae, for Noel to reach out to him after all of the things that he's done to him, after all of the ways that he hurt him, after all of the ways that he terrorized him, after all of the ways that he tried to destroy him, after all of the ways that he physically hurt him, for Noel to ever reach out to him again, like with no obligation to him. I think that's like on that same level as Shin-ae doing the same.
I would agree. And I very much agree with all of what you just said, and I'm going to add to it that I think in addition to that form of understanding with Kosuke, and I'm going to talk a little bit about like Noel's projected anti-hero arc, which some people really love when I talk about and some people really hate when I talk about, where
I'm the biggest fan of this.
where one of the things that Noel says to Kosuke in 212 is, he's yelling at Kosuke and he's like, "You're doing all these things to me, and yet I'm still managing to be the bigger person." And at the end of that, he expresses a desire to stop being the bigger person, and he's like, "Now I'm gonna hit you back." Which, we can argue justification in that, because unlike 243, Kosuke had not been the greatest to him in that moment. Um, but I think with Noel's upcoming anti-hero arc, like you said, we're going to be seeing a lot of parallels between him and Yui. And for anyone who will come at me, we literally asked Kimchi, and she confirmed that everything that we've said, particularly about 243, is exactly how she intended it, with Noel and his parallels with Yui and the way that he weaponized Alyssa's trauma against her and wanted to hurt her for his own catharsis and taking out all the pain that he's felt and wanting to dish it onto somebody else. And that this is intended to be a parallel with an experience that Yui had when she was younger. The way we phrased it when we asked was before she became such a monster that, she had crossed the line so far. But that this is a very intentional parallel between him and Yui. So first of all, for anyone who's going to deny the use of 243, it has been confirmed by the author. I will talk about this to my grave. 243 is my Roman Empire, and I'm insufferable since getting this. This is the validation that I needed to keep living my life. But but what I basically expect is that he is going to have a lot of similar feelings to what Yui had when she started on this revenge path, because that's what she's still on. She's in her head. She's still on an endless revenge arc. And the main difference is that we expect Noel to be able to stop, but we expect him to be close to or around or even towed over that line when he does. That doesn't mean that he's going to murder someone. For some reason, people keep jumping to the conclusion that I think he's going to murder people. I don't. But he's going to do morally questionable things, and he's going to do it from a place of his own pain and believing that he's justified because of the pain he felt, and not actually being that justified. That maybe he's only targeting people who he thinks deserves it, but do they really? And it's like that. Who is he targeting? What's it based off of? What point in their life are they at? Has this person actually hurt him, or does he think that they had something to do with something that they didn't? We don't know all of that yet. But I basically anticipate that he's going to very genuinely think that the people he's targeting and the way they're targeting him are justified. But ultimately, it's going to be coming from the same place of pain and bitterness and resentment that Yui's actions have come from. And the thing about Yui is she's 20 years down the line into this, maybe even longer. And so when you get that far and you never stop fighting, and all the people who wronged you have kind of already been, targeted, and you've gotten back, like, you've, whatever we can call justified revenge, you've gotten it, or you've gotten as much of it as you're going to get, and now you're punching down at everyone else, because now that you're on this track, you can't stop, and you don't know what stopping looks like. Whereas for Noel,
Right.
we anticipate that something's going to stop him and it's going to bring him back, which we anticipated being all the connections and supports that he's built and such. Which I'm over explaining this, but I'm tired of people getting up in arms with me about this. And Solidarity.
And again, to be clear, we fully acknowledge Yui has long since crossed the line.
Yeah.
She has become part of the problem that created her. Like,
and that's the point that we expect Noel to not get to. But
right.
You
Just
have
saying
to
that because this has also come up before too.
Yes.
We know Yui has crossed the line. You can understand how a character became this way and sympathize with their origins while fully acknowledging, yes, Yui is part of the cycle. She became the very cycle that created her, and she created Noel. That's why he's going on this parallel. That's
Right.
why he's going to parallel her, because she created him in her likeness.
Right. And like and I'm gonna steal from some of what the chat has been saying. We're like,
we love our chat.
We love our chat. That so the thing that I get at is that in order for this to be an impactful foil, a foil that really shows both how easy it is to become the bad guy and like take our pain out on other people when we're not justified, and what we need to come back from it, we have to see Noel actually struggle with it. We can't see him continue to just be in the right and, you know, maybe he's doing bad things, but we can genuinely explain it all away. And we know that the things he's doing don't change who he is as a person because we anticipate where he's going to end up, and we anticipate that he's not going to like lose himself in the way that someone like Yui has, where they've become the problem. But that doesn't mean that everything that happens along the way is going to be okay. That doesn't mean that he's not going to do bad things. That doesn't mean that like he's going to pull that, you know, like kind of cliche hurt people. And as another to back us up more, Kimchi said in that same conversation that she thinks we have a good idea of what Yui's backstory is, as well as saying that Yui's backstory would change the genre of I Love You. So there's a lot packed in there, and she said that we're on the right track. So she said that we're both on the right track with Yui's backstory and how she is using Noel and Yui as parallels. And like someone said, it's a similar trajectory. It's not that he's going to become Yui and do the same things as her. It's that she is somebody who was put down and denied and hurt by her family because they didn't want her to be anything and they didn't want her to be able to threaten them. And she took it and she made it everyone else's problem and she fought her way out. And we see where that led her. For Noel, she created him in that image. She put him down and hurt him and, you know, squashed basically the bug before it could become a threat. And she molded him in that image because she built that resilience in him and that ultimate need to fight his way out, where she's not going to let him go. So she's forcing him to fight the same way that she did. And so I said, Noel paralleling Yui does not mean Noel is evil or good. Right. Like, he can do bad things and do things that are similar to what Yui did without getting to this point where he's 20 years down the line being everybody's greatest problem. But to get back to my original point, what I think that's going to do, and the reason that I think it's important, in addition to this whole idea of morality and at what point does somebody become the bad guy, at what point do they actually cross that line, how do you break that cycle, and like who gets trapped in there and who doesn't, is being able to feel for himself the reality of not being the bigger person. Where like he has made it a huge goal throughout his life to, no matter what, continue being in his mind the bigger person and like not dishing back out what life throws at him, dishing out something better. And this is so much of his, you know, anger with Kosuke in 212, where I said before, he literally says that he's like, I'm still being the bigger person and I'm tired of being the bigger person. And what we're seeing is that it took him a lot of effort to be the bigger person. And he did it because he wanted to. He did that because that is a genuine part of who he is. But in order to do it, he had to suppress all of the parts of himself that wanted to feel that pain and wanted to let that pain out and could feel that it was so hard to always be the bigger person. And now what we're getting and what we're seeing is that he's started to stop caring as much about whether or not he's the bigger person, because he's like, maybe it isn't worth it anymore to be the bigger person. Maybe I do need to feel the way that I feel. Maybe I do need to let out what I need to do out. Maybe I do need to fight my way out, and I will never fight my way out by being the bigger person. And so in the same way that being yeong-gi, he forsaked all of those darker parts of his identity, in now this kind of metamorphosis, he's shoving away the brighter parts of his personality in favor of feeling that pain. And what he's going to come to in the end is that balance and feeling both. But in taking that time to be, like he said before, and like you've talked about on pod, be the bad guy, he is going to kind of likely lose that a bit of sense of superiority over Kosuke and feel what it was like to be so caught up in your own reality and your own emotions that you hurt other people who didn't necessarily deserve it, or you did things that you weren't necessarily proud of, and you did it because your feelings made you want to do it, as opposed to like Noel has a lot of guilt currently, but it's a lot of universe guilt. It's a lot of like, I was created to be this blight and I'm trying really hard not to be, but I just bring pain and misfortune everywhere I go, which, as much as he feels really guilty and worthless about that, it's not coming from his internal state, you know? It's something that's
Right.
inflicted upon him. Whereas when he becomes more of the bad guy, it is from him, and he has to acknowledge
Right.
that, like, what that feels like, and that helps him understand what Kosuke felt like. And like, it's not the same thing
Right.
there, because like, Kosuke's form of bad and Noel's form of bad are a little bit different. But
Right. But
it's a
oh, go on.
similar, oh sorry, I was gonna say, it creates a similar position where it brings them back to the same level and
Yes.
creates that opportunity for them to reconcile and come back together when
Yes.
one of them doesn't feel so high or below the other.
Because the thing is, as much as we know the anti-hero arc is largely going to be a parallel to Yui, Null is very much going to be parallel in Kosuke. We already see it. 243 is a direct parallel to him going to Kosuke when he needed help. Like, it is deliberately paralleled to us
Yeah, it's
with
placed right
Kosuke.
beforehand.
Right, like it is pointedly shown to us that, Noel went to Kosuke in his darkest hour, and and Kosuke turned him away. Literally kicked dirt in his face. Noel is doing the same exact thing with Alyssa. Like, we are meant to see that exact parallel. That in this moment, because of his own self-justified pain, his own self-justified anger, and his own self-justified hurt, he hurt somebody who needed him, somebody who in his own mind he has decided does not deserve his kindness, does not deserve any of his generosity, and he turned her away when she needed him. And it's the same exact thing that Kosuke did to him. Again, it is pointedly shoved in our faces, and we're meant to see this, and we're meant to see that, yes, Null is going to be in Kosuke's shoes. That is exactly what it's supposed to be. We're going to be seeing him in that same kind of situation where, like you said, he's going to be justifying things based on his own hurt and his own pain, where he's going to allow it to kind of eclipse how he feels, because, like you said, it's where he's going to shove everything aside and let himself be ruled only by those bad feelings, let his own negativity reign him, allow himself to be guided by those dark feelings. um and like, obviously for Kosuke, it's not, I don't want to say that he's been entirely guided by his dark feelings, because ultimately he's been guided by the desire to reach Rand. But as far as it goes with Null, yes, he was very much guided by his fear and his paranoia. And in that regard, that is going to be Null. Um, and I fully expect that he is going to hurt people in that way, because that's that's the whole point. Again, with Alyssa coming to him, it was him seeing her and going, oh, now you need me? You come to me when I'm in the hospital after, like, the worst night of my life, after I have, like, the best, worst birthday of my life, and you come to me and you need me? Like, that's exactly what it's supposed to be. And that's,
Mhm.
I think, what we're going to be seeing. And people, we've got to look at it that way, because, like you said, it's not only that Kimchi has, like, straight up told us that, but, like, that is exactly what the writing is trying to tell us. Like, she
And
wants us to see that Noel is saying, no more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm done being nice. I'm not going to be nice to the people who haven't been nice to me. And just because we as readers think that we can justify it, because that's the whole point of this, right? Like, the
Mhm.
thing that I repeat all the time about Noel's anti-hero arc is, where do you draw the line? What is and isn't justified? What is Alyssa's greatest offense that made her so deserving of Noel using her own fear of domestic abuse, male abuse, against her? And people will say, oh, she was a bad girlfriend. Oh, she's never thought about his feelings. Oh, she's made him feel small. Does that warrant what he did to her? Does that warrant him decisively using that fear against her, acknowledging what he
Which,
did and
again,
making her feel so afraid, using her actual trauma against her? No, of course it doesn't.
This is Kimchi confirmed that he did this, because a lot of people, and what she's trying to get at so much with Noel, like, I mean, this part isn't what she directly said, but this is what all the writing and what she has said kind of gets to, is that what she's trying to get to is pulling us out of our own perspective, where we're meant to follow Noel. We're meant to empathize with him. We're meant to feel for him. We're meant to feel what he feels. And we're meant to, when he has that moment where he's like, I want to get back, we're meant to have that kind of moment of like, yeah, like, go get what's yours, like, stick it to them, like,
hell yeah,
hell
revenge.
you. Because if we were in Noel's eyes, how much would we feel justified? But we're supposed to be forced to pull ourselves out of our own perspective, which in this case is being projected through Noel's perspective, and see, maybe just because it feels good to us doesn't mean it's actually justified. That oftentimes we will justify ourselves too long and have to really reconcile with what is actually justified. What is, vindicated revenge? What is vengeance? When is it okay and when is it not? Where do we draw the line? How do we balance, intent versus impact and motivations and arcs, and like view our own morality and view the way that we affect other people and the way people have affected us? Because like you were saying in 243, the way that she gets at this is she puts Noel, this person who we're really, really attached to and see as generally the good guy, against Alyssa, this person that we don't know as much about, this person that is generally a disliked and at best divisive character that we don't usually have the same emotional attachment to and we see as a bit of the bad guy. And she puts them against each other, and she puts the good guy in the wrong, where he does have reasons to be mad at her. He does have reasons to be upset with her. Like, he does need to cut her out of his life. But none of that justifies the extent that he went to, and the extent that Kimchi has confirmed he went to intentionally, with the intent to weaponize that trauma against her and hurt her because it made him feel better. And that's where she gets us, where like the rest of it can be true, but in this instance, it wasn't justified. And it's so important to me. And like, this is kind of tying it back to like our concept of family. This is also something that she did really strongly in when Minhyuk and Shin-ae have their fight after was Simhan's like welcome home party.
Yes.
Where we talked really early on about this concept of biological and obligate family with Shin-ae and Minhyuk, where like Shin-ae very much views Minhyuk as family, and despite the fact that Shin-ae is biologically family, she doesn't so much view her as really functional family. And when they come to this altercation, both of them are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to protect Shin-ae by ultimately removing her autonomy from her and fighting her battles for her and deciding who she can and can't be around and such. And Shin-ae lets Minhyuk kind of get away with it because of the fact that he is genuine family to her. He has always been there for her. He's one of the only people who has always been there for her. She knows that his overprotectiveness comes from his own trauma and his good intentions. And it doesn't make it great on her any less. We see that. But she still
kind of gives her some understanding because they have that common history.
Yes. She's like, I don't like that you're doing this, and you shouldn't be doing this. This is not right that you're doing. But like, I still love you, kind of thing. Like, I understand why you're doing it, and it's not going to stop us from having a relationship, and we're going to work on this. But it's okay. Whereas with Shin-ae, she's like, here's your God, get out. Like, she's like, stop this. Like, why do you think that you have the right to do this when we don't even know each other? Where I mean, her methods are different than Minhyuk's. That's like, but the parallel is the same, where they're both being really overprotective of Shin-ae because they think that they have this obligation to her, and that they know best for her, and that they need to remove some autonomy from her to keep her safe. And when they have this confrontation, we're set up to view Shin-hae as the bad guy and Minhyuk as the good guy because we understand these dynamics. We understand that um, she and Shin-hae don't have a relationship really, and that the relationship they do have right now is a little creepy, and that she and Minhyuk have this really deep, solid foundation and relationship together. So um when they clash and Minhyuk comes chasing after Shin-hae, we're intrinsically set to view Minhyuk as in the right. But if we think about what was going on there, like, and I don't remember this scene terribly well, so I'm trying to just remember our previous conversation about it, so you can jump in and correct me at any time. But like, Shin-hae is running away, and
Yes.
she hadn't actually been doing anything to them that night, and she was invited there.
Yeah.
And yeah, and she gets spooked essentially and runs away and gets cornered. And Minhyuk is the one who corners her. He pursues her, and that's when their fight breaks out, where he is on the offensive and dealing the blows, and she is on the defensive. Where if we look at this situation, it makes sense for her to essentially be in kind of a place of fear of him in this spot, which we don't actually know how she felt. But if we look at it kind of objectively, like he is the aggressor in this situation.
Right.
And like,
And also, I think it was one of those situations where it's like, I agreed to meet Shin-ae, I did not agree to meet you,
yes,
kind of deal.
yes, we're like he steps in for Shin-ae without consulting her.
Without, yeah. And so
And
there's kind of like that, kind of like, I'm going to be offended on her behalf, like, who are
mhm,
you to, be doing this? Does she even know that you're meeting me? And like, valid points, but also, who are you to be, taking this offense on her behalf in the first place?
right. And like, I'm kind of like, I'm blanking a little bit on exactly how this went down in the way that we've described it in the past, but I've oh, and Solidarity brought up them projecting on each other, right? Where they're both like talking and they're like, you know, like we just said, like they're both viewing Shin-ae through this lens of obligation and trying to protect her and being like, I need to protect her from you. Um, and they're saying basically the same things, but we view them differently based on the pre-existing relationships. And like Minhyuk's stance of being able to get away with some of that overprotectiveness of Shin-hae, that's not where the problem lies. Like we said before, they do actually have that relationship. That's why she's more empathetic to him when he does it, and why she's more like, you're creeping me out and you're showing up in my dreams to Shin-hae when he does it. But like in the same way as 243, Kimchi both highlights this parallel between them. Oh, and Solidarity's point, he lied to Shin-ae beforehand too. Yeah, thank you guys for coming in with some of the details to refresh my brain a little bit. Um, but she both highlights the fact that this parallel exists between them, and she is using them as this parallel of each other and this foil to each other, as well as the fact that even though in the broader sense of things, in the grand scheme of things, we should view Minhyuk as more of the good guy in these relationships, that doesn't mean that in this instance he wasn't being the bad guy.
Right. But also, like from that found family versus blood family sentiment, it also, like you said, it has that sentiment of, because he's family, Shanae will make more allowance for him. Whereas, blood family only gets you so far. It's that actual relationship. It's that actual establishment. Like, like she has that establishment to be able to sit down with Minhyuk and say, look, this isn't something that you have to do for me. Like, because like I think a very significant thing to point out in this situation is that, you know, like obviously Minhyuk is very much in the wrong for this, but we also have to keep in mind that the person Shin-ae is at this moment is a very different person than Minhyuk left behind when he went to Chicago, you know. And I don't say this to justify him, but more to, you know, give that understanding of why he, you know, does what he does. It's not just because he feels like he has an obligation to protect her. That's obviously a very big part of it. But we've seen from the flashbacks, from the way that Maya talks about her, from the way Minhyuk treats her, the person Minhyuk left behind when he went to Chicago was somebody who didn't stand up for herself. It was somebody who, you know, who did need a little bit of that protecting. Obviously, again, not somebody who need somebody who fights her battles for him. But you know, for a big part of that conversation they had was, you know, Minhyuk having to come to terms with and realize my girl has grown up. Look at her. She's changing, she's growing, she's really starting to come into her own. She's really starting to handle her own conflicts, and that's new for him. But, you know, to his credit, he's working on it, you know, like it's not, you know, when Shin-ae says, hey, I don't need you to do this, I don't want you to do that, you know, he doesn't play the, oh, you don't know what you need, you don't know, blah blah blah, you know, he listens, and you know, I give him props for that.
And I think
Whereas, you know,
also, like,
Shin-ae continues doing what Shin-ae's doing.
and I think also when we bring up that, like, Minhyuk left behind a Shin-ae who's a very different version of herself than
Yes.
he came back to. The same thing happened with Shin-hae, and we've talked about
Mm-hmm.
how, like, it seems like part of her, like, draw to the stalking angle is that, like, she heard this name on the loudspeaker and she pretty consistently talks about Shin-ae, like, as a third entity, you know, not so much like a
Mm-hmm.
direct person, where she's like, I was wondering what my long lost sister was up to, what kind of person she is now, where, like, she does in many ways, like, she doesn't seem to view Shin-ae as the, you know, complete and changed and independent of Shin-hae person that she is now.
Mm-hmm.
She's still seeing her, at least somewhat, through that lens of this, like, 5-year-old child that I left behind, and this idea of this 5-year-old child that I left behind all those years ago. And she's operating as such. And she isn't really making an effort to actually get to know Shin-ae. That's the whole thing, where everything that she knows about her is coming through that kind of third party periphery, where she knows about Shin-ae, but she doesn't know who Shin-ae is. Whereas with Minhyuk, we have a similar concept where he left behind a version of her that's so different than who he came back to. And likely part of the foil is that we're watching Minhyuk actually try to get to know who she currently is, even
Mm-hmm.
though he's struggling with it.
Right. And again, like I know when I was like waxing poetic about this, like I know there was something about that when I was talking about like how Shin-ae only knows her through the perspective of others. She only knows about her through this lens where she's viewing her. But despite that, like you said, she doesn't seem to really know who Shin-ae is. Whereas, you know, yeah, Minhyuk is at least making that attempt. It, you know, he wants to know who Shin-ae is. He wants to see her grow. He's happy seeing her grow. Does he continue to meddle? Yeah. Does he acknowledge it's something he needs to work on? Yes. Do I hope we're going to see in the future that it is a thing that he's continuing to work on? God, yes, yes. But you know, I again, like I feel like it's one of those things where, like you said, Shanae you know, she gives allowance for it because, you know, that is the thing, right? Like with family, you do allow a certain birth of allowance for things. And again, that's not to say she's going to allow him to always do this, but rather like, because you're a person who cares about me and loves me, I understand. And I think as they continue to grow up, and you know, as we go into the time skip, we're going to see how that relationship grows with them and how that birth of allowance changes, you know, and like where does that tension grow, because there probably will be some kind of tension for that in the future. um but likewise with Shin-ae, because again, there's that lack of obligation, there's that, I don't owe you anything. And in that sense of, is Shin-ae ever going to try to learn, is she ever going to make that effort to learn who Shin-ae really is, or is she going to continue to project her? Is she going to continue to try and fit her into her idea of who she is? Because I think that's kind of one of those things that we stumble into when it does come to blood family, right? Because we haven't really touched on it, but in a way, I guess we kind of have that when it comes to Yui and Kosuke, right? I mean, with Yui, it's more that she's molding him, but in a sense, like, what's the difference between like molding the idea of who you want your sister to be, who you think she is, your fantasy of what she's like, versus literally molding your son into who you need him to be, right?
This is so funny to bring up with the whole I can't say much because the microwave stream.
Okay.
The microwave where we learned about their origins and some things that let us kind of connect Yui and Shin-ae together. Not that they're the same person.
I wanted to ask you about that so much. I'm not going to.
Like I don't know how much we can. Anyone who's seen the microwave stream, especially with what I just laughed at.
You guys
know what we're getting at. You guys know what we're talking about. Anyone who hasn't seen the microwave stream, I'm sorry. Yeah, our chat's like, I get it.
If you are a patron of kimchi's, we need you, if you haven't yet, to watch
the May 19th, 2023.
Yes, please watch it. Kimchi gives us a peek into what the very original I Love You was like. We can't talk about it because that's Patreon content, but if you watch it, you will get some ideas.
You will probably, like, if you watch through it and then come back to this segment and hear what we just said, it will probably make a lot of sense.
I so badly, sometimes I just want to be like, can I just go make a post in Kimchi's Patreon and be like, this is a thought I have about bleep, 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 and just post it there. That way it's like, there, it's out in a place where I can safely say this. Like, listen, anyway, point is,
yeah, and look, it was such an impactful stream that I have the date memorized. Like,
yeah, it's, why is it called the microwave stream? Duh, you watch it and you'll find out.
It was a good one, guys. It was both a good one from, like, fun and lore.
Fun fact, that stream brought me to the I Love You Discord.
It did, and look where we are now. This podcast was brought to you by the May 19th, 2023 microwave stream.
Incredible. But no, yes. So, yes, so, fantasies and molding people into who you would like them to be. I don't know how to continue. No, I can do this.
I don't know. We were just saying there's some interesting kind of similarities.
No, it's more like I'm just like, how do I say? Okay, no, we got this. Anyway, the point is, blood ties, manipulation. You see why I'm struggling now.
Everyone who is not a patron, I'm so sorry. We tried.
You should go, even if you can do it for only 1 month. Go subscribe just so that you can at the very least go watch that one stream. Totally worth it. Promise. So it will literally change the way you think about I Love You.
It'll change your whole life. We've got this culture in the Discord where we assign, role tags to people based on things that they do in the server, and some of them are I Love You themed, some of them are not, some of them are fun, and some of them are useful, some of them are funny, like things like that. And there's a role tag for having watched this stream, and it's called Enlightened, because truly it changes your life.
I made a friend of mine who's not even into I Love You watch it because it was just such a good time. But so that's manipulative blood relatives, right? I feel like, I guess this isn't something that we have like directly said yet, but I feel like that's probably going to be part of that wrench in Shin-ae's relationship with her sister, is that denial of agency, right? Because obviously that can be a hurdle to her relationship with Minhyuk, but because that relationship pre-exists, because they work on it, because there is active effort, we are more willing to forgive people if we have a relationship with them. Whereas when it comes to Shin-ae, it's like, who are you? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. You're not part of my life. And, especially when you know somebody only from like skulking through their life, from, we have now fast press spoiler, confirmation that she spies on Shin-ae through other people in Shin-ae's life. Like, how do you reconcile with that? Especially when, again, it comes back to that point that, why aren't you directly connecting with me? She's got this whole found family who has made this direct effort. She's got someone like Minhyuk, who he forsook the entire middle school to be her friend. And like, obviously, we know that those weren't real friends, but the point was, that was such a meaningful move. But especially, it's like, who are you to deny my agency when we don't have a relationship, when you don't know me like that, when you don't know me, you have this idea of who I am, this fantasy perhaps of who I am. We talk sometimes about how does Shin-ae see the people in Shin-ae's life. Obviously she sees Minhyuk as being like overbearing and too overprotective. If you can't see Noel with a very good outlook, like unless you're there for the very intimate moments, like there's just no way to see him with a good positive outlook, right? Like if you've seen the news, if you've seen anything, there's no good outlook. Even if she had never seen Kosuke before, and we know that can't be true because she's been all throughout the story, you can't see him in a good way. And especially now that he's a super soggy kitten. Like, it's just like, oh God, what a pathetic man he is, we don't know what she's been told about their father, but enough that she does not want him to see her, / she doesn't want to see him. It's just, she doesn't have a good view of anything in Shin-ae's life. And it's like, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to more of their interactions in the future, but I'm also like, I don't anticipate anything in the future ever going very well either. So it's also like, whoo, and like, I'm not saying that she's like on Yui's level of manipulation, because like, let's be real, nobody comes close to Yui, like, obviously. But it's just, what am I trying to say? I don't know. Elle, do you have thoughts?
I mean, I feel like we really just kind of keep harping on like this idea, and I'm gonna bring it back to like a broader idea of this kind of blood versus fan family, especially because we said that we were gonna talk positively and negatively about both sides. I feel like we've been a little bit like heavy, because ultimately I think
the Shin-ae Shimhan was like really positive.
it was, and we only
That's
talked
a
about
really,
that. But,
really positive blood family.
I think Kimchi basically chose to make less quantity wise and like screen time wise blood family relationships that are positive in that way, probably because of the fact that we naturally tend to emphasize them more,
right?
And took more of these found families and highlighted them while creating more of these problematic blood ties, and like we can look at Shin-ae and Simhan, and we can also look at like the Park family, where like certainly they've got their problems. Like we talked a lot about Maya and Minhyuk's relationship in the secondaries characters episodes. Oh, this is a great time for me to say this. So most people who are currently watching this channel did not watch our episode on the secondary characters, and genuinely it is one of my favorites that we've done. I really liked it. We gave, I think, about a little more than a half hour to each of Dodie. What am I even saying?
I don't know.
I was combining Dieter and Soshi.
Oh, I was like, are you like going into Japanese on me?
No, I mean, kind of. Dieter, Soshi, Maya, and Minhyuk. But we talked about them not so much in the lens of like, you know, who are they to our main characters? What role do they fulfill in the narrative? But who are they as people? What emotions and experiences and feelings do they have? And how does that drive them and impact how they interact with others and how they view themselves and their sense of the world and such, where it was really looking at them independently as characters. And if you haven't watched that episode, I would really, really recommend it. Like I said, it is honestly one of my favorites that we've done because I feel
Justice
like
for Soshi.
Justice for Soshi, because I feel
And
like
Maya.
yeah, and I feel like that's a way that we often don't really sit down and look at the four of them. A lot of the time we view them in how are they related to our main characters more than who are they and like what is their life like.
And
And
they're
so
really well developed secondary characters. Like
honestly they are.
like funny, like we wound up not including Rika in this because Rika was like the only secondary character of, you know, like Shanae's friends who really doesn't have a lot of that standing on her own. But like these four really are independent characters who exist outside of our main characters.
Right. And like when we talked about Maya and Minhyuk, like we talked a good amount about the way that their relationship is and the way they're related to each other because it's relevant to how both of them came out. And I'm not going to rehash it here because I'm going to make you go watch episode, I think it was 10, in order to get that information. Please go watch episode 10. Um but like looking at both Shin-ae and Simhan in the parks, we can see these positive love relationships and we can see how they were able to develop into positive relationships as opposed to this plethora of relationships of blood family that Kimchi gives us that are negative, that aren't positive, that don't have that actual foundation build up, but are kind of shoved together by nature of being blood related. And then
Worth mentioning Nessa and Noel. We
yes,
haven't really
Nessa
touched
and
on,
Noah
but
as
like
well.
we have talked before about how obviously Nessa is Noel's foundation, and to
Green,
touch
I Love
on a
You too with
previous
Trashellie episodes 8 and 9.
and to touch on a previous point, a fundamental part of Noel's anti-hero slash Yui parallel and why he will ultimately foil Yui is largely because he was raised by Nessa and he wasn't raised in the Hirahara family. It's
Mm-hmm.
because he has completely different fundamental values because he was raised with a warm, loving mother who, from the very few glimpses into their life, we can be, you know, we are shown loved him fiercely and dearly and affectionately. And we've seen that very sharply contrasted against Yui and Kosuke's relationship. You
Right.
know, like
And Kosuke
very.
himself, like, that's so much
Mhm,
of why he holds all that fear and resentment and why he can't even bear to see Nessa's face in his mind. Because
right.
in both our narrative and his, eyes, his own feelings, that mother-son relationship is so strongly contrasted with the one he experienced.
God, it literally blinds him. That's sad.
Hmm. And like, but we have these relationships that are so incredibly important and impactful of blood family. And then we have, like we said, that contrast with these negative blood family relationships, even when you said just looking at Nessa and Noel versus Yui and Kosuke. And we watch how they're built and not built, and then the same thing in the found family relationships, where she gives us these plethora of relationships and has us watch how they're built and let us watch how do you decide who is and isn't a part of your family, and how does who you consider family interact with who really acts like it and who doesn't, and how does that impact you and impact the way that you experience the world and the relationships that you have. Because she really likes to compare and contrast blood family and found family, and she doesn't treat either one as inherently superior or inferior or destined to succeed or destined to fail, but she lets us watch what makes a strong relationship. What are some of the factors unique to these blood relationships? What are some of the factors unique to these found relationships? And how does it all come together?
Right. And I think Shin-ae is a very good example of that, because she is one of, I think she's like the only character who has like that truly good remaining blood family and found family. I mean, I guess now that Noel has Nana, as T pointed out, but we know that like Noel has a very complicated relationship with Nana, so I feel like that doesn't even quite count, because he still goes into his whole, like she could be a paid actor for all I know. So I don't think that quite counts. I think that's something to revisit when / if he, resolves his feelings with her, and, for all we know, maybe that'll happen after she, dies, who knows? So,
I
like looking at it
the
from,
amount,
huh?
I was just gonna be like, the amount of people that in Noel's life that just up and die on him, and he has to make peace with their ghost. Like, oh,
Noel's kind of like a walking graveyard when you think about it.
I mean, okay, listen, not that I'm saying that his self-concept is justified, because we know that it's not. We know that he shouldn't think that way about himself. But I see
Oh,
how he got there.
Elle, should we do like an astrology reading for Noel sometime, maybe?
We've talked
Should
about
we dig into
doing
him later?
we've talked
Right?
about doing it as like a fun little, non like plot lore related
I
Tea
feel
with
like we
Trashy
gotta dig
episode.
into him a little bit, because it's like, what's happening up in his alignment. But
Astrology reading for
we
everyone.
have like
We'll
talked
have that
about
on
doing
the
like a
docket as
whole
like a
astrology.
fun
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
thing. And I mean,
When we
yeah,
run out of ideas.
we
Yeah,
need the
it's
typology
generally we
episode.
want it to be something like that. That's
Yeah,
how the
basically like a
whole
whole.
podcast After Hours happened. So
Yeah, we
go
just
watch
started.
that.
Yeah,
But
there's a little snippet of it in the After Hours. Although the After Hours is more us talking generally. But yeah, and I think the typology is particularly fun to use with Kimchi's characters, because from what I can tell, she used like, and whether or not you believe in various typologies doesn't matter, but like stuff that is true to the philosophy of the typology. So like whether or not it'd be accurate for a real life person, we don't know. It doesn't matter. We don't care in this instance. But like Kimchi read from a source that was accurate to the philosophy of these typologies and selected very carefully what she assigned to her characters. We know that she was more on it with the astrology than she was with the Myers-Briggs. Her Myers-Briggs source wasn't great. But for astrology, from everything that I've seen, she had a very good source. So like the knowledge, and I mean, if you've watched the After Hours episode, you know that I do know a lot about astrological theory. And so like the knowledge that I have aligns very well with who her characters are, and like who they like, the actual like real depth of their characters, and like the actual intended meanings of the signs that she's inside to them. Because a lot of times people, and like authors are kind of often guilty of this, where like they'll tend to give very shallow assignments to their characters, and it's like, well, yeah, of course they've labeled this character as a Scorpio or whatever, because based on this shallow idea of Scorpio, they've assigned this to their character and it doesn't tell me anything deeper about them. But with Kimji's characters, when we look at the sign that she gave them, and especially the day of their birthday, because that's how she got this, she had like she basically said that she had like a Chinese birthday book that had a description for every day of the year. And that aligns very strongly with like the common popular typology theories about the specific days of birth from what I've seen, from what I've been able to find. And so, like, it's very carefully chosen, and it's based on the depth that Kimchi knew her characters had, and it's based on, like, sources that were giving a pretty thorough explanation. So it's really interesting to see her characters in this way, because it does actually tell us something about them and the way that she was conceptualizing her characters that we may not know, as opposed to, like, I made this character a Cancer because they cry a lot, which some authors will do. Which, like, that doesn't tell me anything. But, like,
Also, make them a Scorpio then.
Exactly. Like that's not even really all that right.
We're not going to get into that though, because that is a whole tangent.
Yes. And it's like, just from the limited amount that I've kind of looked into it, there is stuff to glean there that seems to align with what Kimchi was intending for it to convey.
Yeah. But to go back on subject, I think, like you were saying about, like, the comparing and contrasting of, like, those blood and family ties, and what do they mean, what do they represent. I think Shin-ae is probably the one who is obviously the easiest to see that in, where, you know, we do have you know, Simhan versus Shin-ae with, you know, blood versus blood family. Where, you know, I think ultimately, yeah, it's not meant to be like where we're heralding one as better than the other. Although I think you have a very good point where found family is meant to have that kind of higher position. Well, no, I don't want to say higher position. It's meant to be held
more prominent
in
the screen time, I think.
right.
He
It's
gives
meant
it more
to be
time so
right.
that it feels equal to our blood family.
Yes. In that same way, where we're meant to anticipate that Kosuke and Shin-ae's very platonic relationship will be just as important as her romantic relationship with Noel. We're meant to know that found family relationships are meant to be just as important as those blood family relationships. And that, you know, blood family does not mean that this trumps, that this is better.
Exactly right. She very much wants to put the genuine relationships that we have on an equal playing field and on a level where we can, like, see them shine in the way that they're supposed to. Which, like you said, she does a very similar thing with blood family and found family that she does with romantic love and platonic love and familial love, where, like, Kimchi does a very good job of having all of her relationships and all of her expressions of love, when they are supposed to be positive, feel very equally important, and really want and force us to look at how they are made and how they're built and what allows them to be like that, versus just what type of relationship is this.
Because it's ultimately like, what do you do to make that relationship meaningful? You know, it's like
how do
maybe
you
this person, you know, maybe this person is a little overbearing, but do they make effort, or are they somebody who, you know, doesn't ever listen? Like, that's kind of that ultimate thing. Is this a person who's making effort? Is this a person who talks? You know, Shin-ae and Simhan, that's a bridge that we're going to watch them cross. That's going to be the difference between a strained familiar relationship versus one that's able to stay close, or rather, in their case, that's going to be able to eventually, fingers crossed, reconcile in the future. You know, what is it that makes your relationship endure and matter? What is it that holds you together?
Right. And it's like, each of these relationships, like, obviously we do know that there's a difference in the way that they all present, in the way that blood family presents, in the way that found family presents, in the way that romance presents versus platonic versus family love and all that. And there's more types that I'm not listing, but those are the obvious ones, right? And it's like, each of those bonds just has its kind of its own bit of dynamic and its own bit of inherent kind of tendencies of strengths and weaknesses, but none of that puts one above the other. And like you said, it's about what is happening within that and how you build those, and how you either play on the positives of those or bring on the negatives of those or any combination of above. And I think this is all a very strong thread through I Love You. Like we've said before, and I say it all the time, especially when people bring up like, why is it called I Love You if it's not a romance? And it's like, because I Love You is so strongly and so much about love. And like we said, you know, it's about the love that you receive and the love that you give and the love that you need and the love that you need to be open to. But it's also very much, like we said early on, built on this backbone of family. This family that means and can look like all different things. And I I feel like I feel like I feel like that's a good place to
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks. Me not being able to make a concluding sentence. But no, I feel like that's all, folks, and that is our kind of current perspective on blood family and found family, and I guess also general love in I Love You.
Woo!